Well, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Your opponent's not here yet, so we're going to get started. I guess the first question I would say is that the approval rating of Congress is in the low teens. Why do you think that is, and what would you do to change that?
I think the reason why people have such a low opinion of Congress and Washington in general is because there's such a level of partisan gridlock and nothing's getting done. And I can understand that. That's what people complain about. Most of America is in the middle. They are sick and tired of people pointing fingers and saying who's at fault. You know, I was asked recently, someone stopped me when I was in Cedarhurst and said, why do people do negative ads? You know, I've seen all these negative ads against you. And I said, well, I'm not running a negative campaign. What I'm trying to do, I want to be the kind of candidate that as a voter, which I am, I would want. Tell me not what's wrong with this one, but tell me what's right with you. And I think one of the reasons why I got into this race was because I share that disappointment with the lack of progress in Washington on a number of different issues. And I think what we need more of are politically independent people, not partisan hacks who are going to go down there and just lob all these, you know, provocative, accusations to the other side. I think the key to the success that I've had as DA is that I reach across the aisle and work with people of different political persuasions to get things done. And I think that's what people want to see in Washington. And I'm optimistic enough to think that I won't be able to change the culture myself, but I think the more and more people like me that go there, the more you're going to see get done.
But the predictions are the Republicans will pick up more seats. The district's very gerrymandered. People are afraid they're going to lose on their right, you know, if they're not conservative enough.
Yeah, but then you hear someone like Rand Paul who's talking about investing in job training for nonviolent offenders. Don't send them to prison. You know, now I don't know if that's going to be his position. Is he lining himself up to be more, you know, maybe socially progressive? But I think the trend is to go away from the extremes and to talk more where people are, which is socially inclusive and fiscally responsible. Doesn't matter what you are, Republican or Democrat, Tea Party, uber liberal, doesn't matter. That's where most Americans are right now. And yeah, I think that it's going to be difficult. You know, if I were to win and go to Washington, we would clearly be in the minority, obviously. But my job would be to do everything I can to build relationships. I mean, that's my style, is to reach. I mean, one of my closest friends, literally in my life, is Chuck Fuschillo. There are certain things that we do not talk about, like my father and I. There are certain things we don't talk about. But we put aside whatever differences we had from a political standpoint and said, let's get stuff done. And we were able to do that. Ed Mangano, too. He's been a very good county executive for the DA's office, you know, in terms of partnering with me on gun buybacks and things like that. That's what I think people want to see more of. Is it going to be difficult? Yeah, but everything in life is difficult.
So you think Congress is more divided ideologically than the country is, than the people are? It seems to.
That's the way it's reported. Now, look, how much of that is real and how much of that is the way the media reports it, just to exacerbate the situation by saying nothing gets done? Well, I don't mean you guys. I mean, you know, it's hard to turn on any cable news channel and not get a skewered version or vision of, you know, what people are trying to sell you. The kind of Walter Cronkites of old are really non-existent. But I think it's people's. You know, I think that's why I think it's important for people to go out there and not just say, I want you to vote for me, but say, this is what I've done and this is what I want to do, so that you have an educated electorate. Because I think that that's what's going to, you know, and obviously voting. You know, when you have 6% of registered Democrats deciding who candidates are going to be in the primary, and we are set up for an all-time record low voter turnout this November, you know, my message to people is if you can stay home, but then understand that 6%, not even 6% of the overall population, 6% of registered voters are deciding who your elected officials are. And I think that, you know, people are, you know, hopefully they'll come out and vote.
You mentioned Rand Paul and his criminal justice initiatives. When you if you should win and you get down there, what would be your focus in terms of committees you would ask to go on, be on, and things like that? Do you see a niche for yourself because of your experience as DA, or do you want to move on to some other issues?
I have not, I've decided not to put the cart before the horse and think about committees and things like that. But I, obviously, from my background, I have an interest in, I think I've been a pretty expansive DA, just, you know, not just on social issues, but certainly law enforcement issues and schooling, and to the extent that I can have an effect on that. I think my priorities should mirror the priorities of this congressional district, and I think my experience dovetails exactly with what they need and what they want. We need investment in infrastructure here. We need to make education work for every student, not just some. And I think, you know, no one will, other than maybe Carolyn McCarthy, who came to the gun issue from the victim perspective, no one's going to have more credibility on an issue like that than I will, in terms of dealing with the issue of gun violence. So those are just some of the things that I have an interest in. But to be honest with you, you know, Homeland Security, obviously, given my background as well. The committees that I will show an interest in will be committees that I think will enable me to do things that the constituents here need and want.
And so how would you prioritize the fourth CD? I mean, are there any things right now that you could tell us that you would fight for or try to get passed or done that would affect the district itself?
So the gun violence issue, obviously background checks, closing those private gun show loopholes, limiting the size of clips, limiting the person's ability to buy military-style assault weapons. That is going to be a clear priority of mine. I think that, you know, having received the endorsement of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence and the Mayor Bloomberg's Every Town Against Gun Violence, he's put $50 million behind that issue to be able to compete with the NRA, and I think that that's going to be something that I'd like to be very involved in, because there are too many communities in this congressional district where kids are suffering and families are suffering because of gun violence. Number one, small businesses. If you go down the main street, Freeport, Baldwin, wherever, anywhere in the 5 towns, you don't see the big box stores. You see all the mom and pop, you know, barber shops and pharmacies. So I think that we need to, you know, expand assistance to small businesses. 60% of small businesses are family-owned. Most people, if you talk about job creation, it's small businesses that create jobs. So I think that however I can, you know, and I've met with a lot of local business owners about putting together a group that can help guide me in how we can help small businesses, because that's the best way to help the economy, getting people jobs. Really want to focus on raising the federal minimum wage. There's no question about that. That is, there are too many people working full-time and being qualified as working poor. They're living in poverty.
What should it be?
I think 10-10 is a good start, obviously. I don't think that it's going to be, and this is kind of where the hyper-partisan rhetoric comes out. It's going to be a business killer. You're going to kill small businesses. Well, you can have carve-outs for businesses that make under a certain amount of revenue or hire under a certain number of people. But, you know, the majority of people are hired by and employed by big companies that can absorb, you know, $10.10 an hour. I mean, it's a moral imperative, as far as I'm concerned, to get people out of poverty who are working full-time. It's not like these people are working 10 hours a week.
Do you think once that happens, we should have it indexed to inflation so
Yes.
we never have to talk about it again?
Yes, yes,
Maybe we can.
I do.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Blake, thanks for coming. We were.
Good morning, sorry I was late.
That's okay, so
We
we
had-
got started, but we'll give you your
That's
time.
okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. How do you do?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. How do you do?
Hi, I'm Lane Phillip.
How do you do?
Nice to meet you.
It's been a long time. Alvin Bessie.
Yes.
Yes.
Been a really long time. Larry Streeter.
Hello, Larry.
Nice to meet you.
And you must be Kathleen Rice.
Yeah.
See you on TV.
How are you, Bruce?
I'm doing good, Kathleen. How are you?
Good.
So, get started, we'll just, ready? Okay. Mr. Blakeman's joined us, so welcome.
Thank you.
And let's jump right into the conversation of what we were talking about in terms of Ms. Rice was giving us her priorities when she got to Congress. So maybe you can tell us what you see are the issues in the 4th District that you would address in Congress.
Well, right now, I think that basically there are two main issues. One is economic security, and the other is national and homeland security. And actually, the Ebola crisis, I think right now, is a homeland security problem as well as a national health problem. So I think those are the two areas that I would like to focus on when I go to Congress. First of all, we have unemployment among 18 to 26-year-olds that is approaching 15%. This is the first generation in the history of America where the 18 to 26-year-old generation is expected to do worse than their parents. We have wage stagnation. We have middle-aged people who can't find employment. They can't find full-time employment. Some of them have full-time employment and now are being offered part-time employment. So I think really job creation is very important. In the African American community, among the 18 to 26-year-olds, the unemployment rate is approaching 50%. Now, what kind of opportunity do they have to have a career and to realize the American dream? America was always the land of opportunity, and now we need to get back to the principles that made us the land of opportunity. So what I would do is I would try to focus on expanding the private sector, creating jobs through the private sector, cutting taxes, cutting costly government regulation, and cheap energy. I think cheap energy is very important. It's our economy in America was founded on cheap energy, and we have the ability to do it, and we should develop that cheap energy so that people will have a reduction in their gasoline prices, their home heating oil, and their overall electricity and utility bills. So that's number one. Number two, Homeland Security and national security. We need to have a plan not to manage ISIS. We need a plan to destroy ISIS or any other terrorist that would threaten America. Number two, we should not engage Iran and try to get them to be part of a coalition against ISIS. Iran is a mortal enemy of the United States. They've called for the destruction of the United States. They're approximately 6 months away from getting nuclear weapons capability. And if they do so, I think it will be a danger not only to America, but to Western civilization. They are a radical terrorist state that sponsors terrorism, and if they get weapons-grade radioactive material, I think that it would be a real danger to America's national interests. So I don't think we should enlist them in the cause. I think basically what we should do is set a firm deadline, have stricter economic sanctions. If they don't work, then we should take military action to destroy their capability to develop nuclear weapons capability. With respect to the Ebola crisis, in the last couple of weeks, it has occurred to me that America is completely unprepared for this crisis. There should have been a massive effort months ago by the Obama administration to send whatever resources we had available to Western Africa to try and solve the problem there. We saw on television hundreds of people dying right before our eyes on television, and this administration did nothing. And now the CDC is unprepared to deal with the crisis. The protocols are not in place, the training is not in place, and basically I think we now have to go forward with a plan to restrict air travel between America and West Africa until we get a handle on the magnitude of the situation, till we get the protocols in place, the training in place, so that we can be confident that we can control the Ebola outbreak here in America.
You covered
Okay,
everything
some
there.
specific, yes.
But I could go on.
Okay, fine. Just want to clarify a point. Do you feel that we unilaterally should take military action to take out Iran's nuclear reactors?
Well, first I would strengthen the sanctions.
Right, and if that didn't work, how long would you give
Well,
the sanctions to?
Basically, the United States unilaterally pretty much extended the deadline along with the United Nations from mid-July to November without any further concessions or sanctions. And basically, Iran continues to move forward with their nuclear weapons program, and we have been doing virtually nothing to stop them. So now they have till November. What I would say is, I would have a hard line in November, then I would install sanctions, see if the sanctions worked over a period of 90 days. If they didn't, then we should take military action to destroy their nuclear weapons program.
Would you
We
like to
should
jump
go to
in?
war in Iran.
I think we can do it surgically, with a surgical
But
airstrike.
that would be going to war in Iran. We don't know what they might do in return, in retaliation for that. You have to accept the fact, I would assume, that if you bomb Iran, you're going to war. And must be prepared then to put boots on the ground and do whatever it takes to win a war in Iran.
Well,
You're prepared to do
we're
that.
virtually at war right now with Iran, with ISIS, with Boko Haram, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Muslim Brotherhood. Let's not kid ourselves. We are in a war with these organizations that are trying to destroy America. If Iran gets nuclear weapons capability, it's only a matter of time before they would give radioactive, weapons-grade material to a terrorist organization, and we'd have a dirty bomb in Times Square or Wall Street that we could kill thousands of people and destroy our economy. We better get serious about this crisis. So whatever you want to call it, if you want to call it war, whatever you want to call it, we better get serious about it and make sure that Iran does not get nuclear weapons capability, whatever that takes.
Okay, let's have your opponent.
And then
jump in here.
I'd also like to go into what I believe is also nuclear weapons proliferation in the region if Iran gets that capability.
But
But
let's deal with this one.
Well, I mean, it concerns me to hear you say, war or whatever you want to call it. War has serious implications. It means something. I think that we have to do everything that we can to resolve this situation with Iran diplomatically. You have to give time for the talks to be effective. The sanctions have been effective up to this point. What you don't want to do is create a level of isolationism that breeds the kind of extremism that could escalate the situation. So I think you need to give whatever time is needed. I think that we will get there, but to even talk about going to war with Iran, I think at this point is irresponsible, and it's not certainly where we should be going.
While you have the floor, on ISIS, and your opponent said we should wipe it out, destroy it. How do you think the United States should proceed?
The way the administration is handling it right now is, I think, exactly what they should do. Was there an underestimation about their threat early on by U.S. intelligence organizations and the administration? Yes. But I think now what the administration is doing in terms of building a coalition, an international coalition, so it's not America going it alone, is the way to go. And, the bombings are what need to be done. But I think that the most important thing now is building that coalition, and that's what the administration is doing.
Mr. Blakeman, you're into boots on the ground, Syria. Tell us the
Well,
extent of how you destroy it.
Well, I'd like to respond to what Kathleen said. So basically, Kathleen's ruling out military intervention if Iran gets to the point where they have nuclear weapons capability. Is that right?
I don't answer hypotheticals when it's a matter of going to war. I think that's irresponsible. I think that it's important to talk about what's happening now.
Well, I think that's
Is the diplomatic process one that you subscribe to or not? That's the question.
I don't have faith in the United Nations to resolve this conflict because their track record to date has been very poor. I believe that Iran is 6 months away from getting nuclear weapons capability. I think that's a dangerous situation. And I think it's irresponsible that there is no plan. And when you talk about a hypothetical, you have to game plan for situations like this. And that's where I think
So you don't necessarily
President-
have to advertise. I have no reason to believe they haven't game planned that.
Well, I think you're wrong. I think you have to set parameters. I think you have to
As a
set,
deterrent.
you
You
have
think
to
we
set
should call
hard
Iran?
you have to set hard deadlines.
And call Iran now and say, listen, this is our plan. If you don't give this up in 6 months, we are going to bomb you, and to use that as a deterrent.
I would,
Fair?
I would, as I indicated, I would increase the economic sanctions. I think that Iran could be brought to their knees economically.
Within your 6 month window?
Within,
That's a tall order.
90
within-
days.
90 days.
You say 90 days.
90 days from November, which is about 4 months.
Well, there's a
The
huge
deadline's, I
section
think,
going on
November
now
16th, something
that
around
no
there.
one's talking about, and that's
Well-
the Saudi Arabia opening the taps, right?
Well, what I'm concerned about, aside from them getting the nuclear weapons capability and the threat to America and the threat to Israel, which I think it's very, very prevalent. I think it's real. I think that then you would have Saudi Arabia in a situation where Saudi Arabia would want to gain nuclear weapons. I think the UAE would be looking at nuclear weapons capability. And I think what we're doing then is we're now expanding nuclear weapons in a very dangerous and volatile region. When you talk about boots on the ground, the reality is that we have to do whatever we can to destroy ISIS, whatever we can. And we have to do whatever we can to make sure that Iran doesn't get nuclear weapons capability. We have to protect America. Western civilization is at stake, in my view. And I think history also indicates that if you look at the rise of the Nazi Party previous to World War II, where they were a very small radical part of Germany, and nobody took them serious. And they became a very serious threat. And as they gained strength, they took over Germany, and then they were able to force the German people into this radical national socialist state that was a warmongering, imperialistic state that is responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people.
So you're comparing ISIS to the Nazi Party?
I am comparing the movement.
The movement.
You have.
And you think
you-
there's a similarity with a nation state and a more amorphous movement that is
I'll-
not so centrally controlled?
That's a good question. I'll explain that. I think basically what you have, I highlighted all the organizations: Boko Haram, Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al Qaeda. Basically, I think that you have 1 billion Muslims or more. Most of them are moderate, law-abiding people that don't have an agenda to destroy Western civilization. They're live and let live. They're good people. But we've seen what happened in the past when we allow bad people to get momentum and to be able to take control of large segments of countries and be able to infiltrate those countries and build a network that then turns into an oppressive regime, which then turns into a major threat to America and Western civilization. So there are parallels there. And I'm not the first person that's made that comparison. It is a movement right now around the world, West Africa, Middle East, Western Europe, here in the United States, that we must stop before it gets out of hand, and then we have a much bigger problem on our hands.
Okay. All right. I know we could spend the whole time talking about this, but I guess there are some other issues. Mr. Blakeman, you spoke about job creation. I had asked you about the 4th District, and you do have a large African-American population there. How are you going to create jobs in Hempstead and Freeport? What about that?
Well, first of all, I think it starts with education. And I visited a charter school the other day in Hempstead where it's just amazing what they're able to do. Their test scores are so much higher than the public schools. So I think that we need choice in education so that people have the ability to fit their children into the right setting for education.
What exactly does that mean? Are you talking charters, but beyond that? Are you talking vouchers? What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I'll get to that in 1 second. First of all, no child learns the same. We all know that. Second of all, when you have choice, some people want it in a faith-based or religious setting. That's best for their children. Some want it in a public school setting. I'm a big proponent of public schools. I graduated from a public school. I went to community college, a public school. I graduated from a university that's a public school. So I'm a big proponent of public schools. I coach basketball. I'm a volunteer coach at Malvern High School. I'm assistant varsity basketball coach there. I am a strong supporter of public schools, but I'm also a strong supporter of choice. So I would extend tuition tax credits for religious-based and private schools who
Would you have that
who offer
income
choice.
indexed at all?
I think it would parallel pretty much what the college index is. We haven't drilled down to all the fine points, but I think something along that parallel. And also, I am a big proponent of charter schools, but I also support public schools. I think that we have to support our public schools because most people are going to be educated in public school.
Right, but I asked you about jobs, so you're just basically
Well,
saying
well,
eventually
I-
better education
I got off the
will
track
lead to
on
more jobs.
I got off the track on education. So I think education is a big part of it. The second thing is we have to expand the private sector. To expand the private sector, in my view, we need to cut taxes. We need more capital in the system.
How are you gonna cut taxes?
Well, we would look at income tax, obviously, on the federal level. So I would be looking to cut federal income tax. And basically, I believe that if we are able to do that, and if we are able to provide cheap energy, we've got a 100-year supply of natural gas right here in New York State on the southern tier. On one side of the border, and I've been there many times, I don't know if Kathleen's had an opportunity to be there, but on one side of the border, they're driving around in brand-new Cadillac Escalades.
Fracking is gonna be a state issue at this point, right? There's no override federal. Can we just limit at least the discussion to what you
Well, I
do
know, I
in
think
Congress?
I
Yeah.
think cheap energy is a federal issue. It's an economic issue and it's a national security issue. So I would differ with
Well,
you
how
on
do you
that.
get to cheap energy then?
Well, can we go back to taxes for a
All right,
second, though? You mentioned cutting taxes a couple of times. Give me a sense of what taxes you would cut and how big a cut is enough?
And on who?
Okay, well, I think they have to be across the board. And basically, you would look at percentages and income. And I think that in certain areas, let's say, at the lower end, you would look at the percentage and perhaps lower the percentage and increase the amount of income until the tax kicks in. So I think you have to look at it not only from a percentage basis, but also from an income basis.
But based on, I'm trying to get a sense of how deeply you think taxes need to be cut to go accomplish what you think that would accomplish. I mean, are we talking halving the tax rates? Are we talking just minor little adjustments? What are we talking about here? And I mean, how much revenue are we gonna forego?
Well, the bottom line is, I think basically we could get to a range of between 10 to 30%. And we would take a look at, again, the revenue side, the income side. I think you have to look at the income side and the percentage. I don't think we can get hung up on the percentage. We have to look at how does this materially affect people.
On taxes?
Taxes. Would you favor raising them to create more revenue? Do you think there should be more tuition tax credits for lower income people? Are we just right? What's your view of that?
Well, there's no question that the tax code has to be reformed. The question is how you reform it. I would never, ever vote to raise taxes on middle-class Americans. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't give tax breaks to wealthy people in Bruce's financial category and pay for that on the backs of the middle class.
But what about across-the-board increases? What if we just said, when the Bush tax cuts expired, we only let them expire for the wealthy. So in effect, we did move a lot of the burden back to the wealthy. What if we would you support going back to the Clinton rates for everyone?
Possibly, but I just don't think that that's, I mean, if you're talking about taxes just as an intellectual exercise, we could do that, but I think that Bruce was talking about it in terms of creating jobs. I don't know if that's really a way to create jobs. I think that the best way to improve the economy is to put more money in the hands of people who are going to spend it, like the middle class. So raising the minimum wage is critical to that. Supporting small businesses is critical to that. I agree that education is part of that. But I also think that you have to talk about investing, and I mentioned that Rand Paul issue about him supporting job training, because that's exactly what we did in the village of Hempstead when we did our CODA initiative. That's what it's all about. It's about getting people job training so that they can actually not just have a job, but a career. We also we have a template here on Long Island that is perfect for investing in clean energy initiatives. And I think, it's not only is that just good for the environment, but you have to, the first step to that is actually acknowledging that you have climate change going on and that it's man-made. I don't think Bruce agrees with that. But you have the ability to create long-term jobs here and also protect the environment for generations to come. So I think it's all of those things together. I just don't think that you're going to get there by cutting taxes and having, for the wealthy and having that trickle down to the middle class and the poor. I just don't
How
think
does
that
Well,
happens.
clean
can I-
energy
can I just
tends to be
respond for
more
1 second to that?
expensive? Clean energy tends to be more expensive. How does that create jobs on Long Island?
Well, eventually, what you're going to do is, yes, when you start any initiative, any business, the early investment is important, and it's not going to pay for itself right off the bat, but eventually it will. But we have to be willing to make that investment.
Sorry.
Well, I completely differ with Kathleen. Kathleen, minimum wage earners are not the middle class. So
What would you call them?
I would say that they're at the lower end of the income
That's right,
spectrum.
they're working poor. That's right.
There you go. They're not.
But how
the-
do you get
they're
people
not-
into the middle class?
Well,
You
what
pay
you're-
them more.
what you're
They're the
proposing
people
to
who
do-
actually put money into the
Well, how
economy.
do you
What you're
feel about
proposing-
raising the minimum wage?
I believe every state should resolve that issue on their own.
So
And
not
in
federal.
New York, the issue has been addressed, it's been resolved. In the short term, I think that both houses of the legislature will probably consider it again. So I think it should be done on a state-by-state basis because every state has different set of circumstances. But by raising the minimum wage from $7 to $8 or $9 nationally is not going to spur the economy, Kathleen. That's the lower end of the spectrum. See, the difference between you and me is I want to create careers for people. I want these young people to
Mr.
have
Blakeman, maybe you
careers.
haven't been, we try to have a conversation with the board and not kind of.
I thought it
one
was,
on one,
okay,
you know, and-
whatever your,
Because,
I'm fine.
Yeah,
I
we-
thought we were getting into a discussion, but that's fine.
because
Whatever.
we kind of live and breathe with these issues, this is what we do, so we really
Great.
want to drill down a little bit on the specifics.
Okay, no,
Um,
I'm fine with it.
Great. Okay.
But, I think class warfare is not helpful.
So you think there should be no federal minimum wage?
No, I think there is a federal minimum wage now of 7%. I would consider raising it on the federal level, but I think it's best done by the states.
Do you want to go more on taxes?
Well, related issue, you both want to hold the line on taxes, but I think Kathleen, you mentioned infrastructure. The needs are great. How do we pay for it? How do we pay for roads and bridges and sewers and all of that? Do we raise the gas tax, for instance?
No.
Maybe we start with Kathleen.
Look, that's always the $64,000 question is you want to have all of these, investments and where do you get the money to do it? I think that, if we were able to have a conversation about really reforming the tax code in a nonpartisan way and coming up with a system that's fair, then I think that, that conversation needs to be had. But up to this point, it's always been very partisan. The Ryan budget, wants to give all the tax cuts to the rich and continue the corporate, cut the corporate tax rate without closing any loopholes or anything like that. So I don't know if that's necessarily the answer either. But look, New York, we have to figure out a way for New York State, which sends $100 billion more to the federal government than we get back, to get more money back here so that we can invest in things. Let the state decide where they're going to make those investments in infrastructure. And I think in a post-Superstorm Sandy world, it's really important to look at alternatives. We are incredibly vulnerable, not just this congressional district, but the whole island. And so I think that that's, we have to be willing to invest in. This is what America is all about. If you want to get off of fossil fuels, you have to be willing to invest in clean energy. And, I think that this is a good pilot place to do it on Long Island for jobs, for the environment, and for the physical stability of the entire island.
Any thoughts on how you fund the federal contribution to infrastructure improvements?
Well, first of all, I think that we need to look at a public-private partnership on some of our infrastructure. I have a lot of experience in infrastructure. I served on the board of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for 7+ years. So obviously, we're a very infrastructure-driven agency. I believe that we have to look at more public-private partnerships with respect to road building, with respect to sewers, with respect to wastewater management, things of that nature. With respect to mass transportation, we have to fight harder for federal dollars here in New York. And I think it's going to be an advantage to have me in the majority in Washington, in the House of Representatives. I'll be in a better position to get those mass transportation funds than a Democrat. And let's face it, if we're getting the short end of the stick, we've got 2 Democrat senators and a Democrat president. I would say it's a failure of Democrat leadership to make sure that we get what we're entitled to back here in New York. And when I'm in the Republican majority in the House, I will fight harder to get those mass transportation funds for projects that are vital, such as the Long Island Railroad.
Of course, every state is fighting hard to get those funds. There just aren't enough funds. That's what all the studies show, that we're trillions of dollars short of what it would really take to repair our infrastructure in this country. And so I'm looking for ideas on concrete ideas that you think might work to fund that kind of work. The gas tax, which is dedicated to highways, has been frozen for, since what, 1993?
22 years.
It hasn't risen at all.
The last thing we need to do is put another burden
But-
on
but
the
how do
middle
you fund
class.
Let me,
Well, I just told you, I think public-private
But that
partnerships are
implies
the
a
ways to go.
public contribution.
Let me
I
let me give
don't-
you
I don't
let me
get
give
it.
you let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. This is out of our district, but let me give you an example. Apparently, there is a sewer problem in Suffolk County. Okay, I don't think it's going to get done unless there's a public-private partnership. If Suffolk County is serious about getting it done, they'll partner with a private group that'll put up the capital, and they'll get the project done. I don't think that Suffolk County has the bonding capability to get that type of a project done. So the reality is that there is a way to get it done, but we can't be doing the same old thing that we've been doing. There's money out there, and that gets back to taxes. There's $2 trillion in American money that is overseas.
Well, before we go
And-
there though, I'm sorry, so you're suggesting maybe in these public-private partnerships to repair the interstate highway system, for instance, we put tolls on those roads to pay back the investment? from
No,
private companies?
I think it's more directed towards different types of infrastructure, not highways, but there's a possibility with bridges, there's a possibility with tunnels, and certainly environmental projects. There's a great possibility for partnerships.
let me try to cast this a little bit differently so that I understand where you're both coming from. The gas tax is one of the unusual taxes that is not as a percentage of something, but is an absolute amount, I believe 18 cents a gallon. So in the last 22 years, as infrastructure needs have doubled and tripled and quadrupled, and we haven't covered them at all, and this becomes even worse because, you know, the roads are physically made of oil. That's what asphalt's made of. Essentially, the gas tax has been cut by about 70% relative to inflation. Do you really see it keeping pace with inflation in the same way that all of our other taxes, like income taxes, do as an increase? Or would it, I mean, would it not make sense for our gas tax to accurately reflect the inflation of the last 22 years?
Sure, I think so.
So you would support an increase of it
Well,
to that level?
I would, depending on,
Okay.
I think that it's a conversation to be had, for sure, yeah, definitely.
Bruce?
No,
It should not reflect the growth in expenses.
I would not increase the gas tax.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, you brought up climate change, and you said your opponent does not believe in it or doesn't feel there should be any remedy, so maybe we
I
can
never
start
said that.
there. Tell us, vote came up about, the urgency of the federal government stepping in to make vulnerable areas such as Long Island more resilient to storms. Do you feel that's something should be done, or you think the threat is exaggerated?
Well, as I've stated in the past, and I want to be very clear on this, what I've said in the past is, I've heard the debate on both sides. I'm not a scientist, and basically, I believe that conservation is an important goal, whether you believe in climate change or not. I've read all the material. You have eminent professors from major universities with tremendous credentials that argue both sides of the issue. Which one is right, which one is wrong? I don't think we need to get into that debate. I've said consistently that I believe in conservation. I do. And I think that it gets silly when you get into a conversation about climate change when basically there is a difference of opinion from people who are very bright, who spend their whole life and their whole career studying it. And the reality is we don't know whether it's cyclical, we don't know if it's climate change, nobody knows for sure. But conservation is still a good goal, and I support that.
How would you encourage it in Congress?
Well, I think obviously, I think some of the measures that we're taking to improve mileage on automobiles and trucks is a good thing. I think natural gas, as we did on vehicles in the Port Authority, is a good way to cut down. I think there's a lot of different ways.
When you say mileage, are you talking about the CAFE standards? The mileage standards set by the government? Or-
Yes, on the automobile
So
manufacturers.
you would be in favor of ratcheting those up?
I would be in favor of working together with the automobile manufacturers on what is doable and what is achievable. I don't think government should ever come in and dictate what is not able to be achieved scientifically or practically. So I think I think we can sit down and do it, absolutely, and I think we've made tremendous progress.
One
I
last
mean,
question, am I interpreting from what you're saying that you don't support any federal intervention in cutting down on carbon emissions, being credits, taxes, or whatever?
Cap and
No.
trade, none of that?
no,
Cap and trade, nothing?
no.
Okay. Kathleen, on reducing carbon emissions, do you feel there's a role in Congress for being more active in either cap and trade or taxing carbon,
Yeah,
reducing coal production? Tell us.
I do, and I actually disagree with, I think that that's exactly the role for government, is to prod businesses to be better and to do better. I mean, if you look at, what President Kennedy did with the whole space program, that's what America is about. It's about being the best and encouraging people, whether they're in the public or private sector, to do their best, to challenge people. Do I think that there should, I would support a carbon tax? Yeah, I think that the people who are actually have a direct hand in affecting the environment should be the ones to pay, not everyone else. So yeah, I would support that.
Immigration, been a big deal on Long Island, been a big deal in Nassau lately. I think often there's actually very little difference between what most candidates believe in terms of immigration reform, but how do you think we get there? What do you think there is? What do you want in immigration reform?
I think when you have someone like Peter King talking about a path to citizenship, there can be real action on this issue. I see it as a national disgrace that we haven't had immigration reform up to this point. It is something that is most acutely felt at the local level. I see it every day in the job that I do as DA. We have to come up with a path to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented people who are here. There's no question that if you are here and you are playing by the rules, that you should be eligible for that path to citizenship. If you're here and you are undocumented and you're not playing by the rules, you're breaking the law, you should be deported. Very clear about that. I think what this administration doesn't get enough credit for is how much they have done to actually try to secure the borders in terms of building more fencing and sending more Border Patrol agents down to the border. But ways that we can improve it, obviously, to counterbalance a path to citizenship, because I'm here because, my father's father came here at 12 years old in late 1880s from Ireland with $20 in his pocket and came in through Boston, built a family business, and brought his whole family over here. So God bless America. We have to embrace, I think, the ideals, the truly American ideals that have made this country as diverse and as wonderful as it is, obviously with an eye towards security as well, especially given everything that's going on around the world. So do I think that we need to improve technology at the border? Yes. In terms of equipment and things like that, yeah, I think that we definitely have to do that. But I think that, this is one of those issues that, regardless of why Peter King has kind of taken a more middle-of-the-road approach to a path to citizenship, I think we need to, I would be willing to work with him. I don't care if he's a Republican, doesn't matter to me. If he's talking about a path to citizenship, I think then we're talking about having some movement here on this issue, finally.
Sir?
I think Kathleen is the first candidate for Congress this year, Republican or Democrat, that thinks that the borders are secure and that we're doing a good job. I think we're doing a miserable job securing the borders.
Do you think Obama is doing better or deporting more than Bush did?
I think that basically what we need to do is secure the borders, and we can do that. And I think we then have to sit down. I do agree with Kathleen that it's a national disgrace that we don't have an immigration policy. There are two conditions that I have to a national immigration policy. One is I have to be convinced that we're serious about securing the borders and actually take material efforts to do that, which we have not. The borders are not secure, and I think we all know that and we all see that. So we need to do that. The other thing is I would not be in favor of amnesty. However, I don't think that the penalty has to be harsh. I think basically we just have to treat people materially different who came here legally than those who came here illegally.
Do you support a path to legal residency for these people?
I think so, yes.
So the only difference really for you is the vote?
No, the difference for me, I could have voted on the Senate bill if I was more confident that we were spending the resources on securing the borders and more serious about securing the borders, which obviously we're not.
So for you, would it be bifurcated? Would you only support it if you do border security first and then come back later to do all the other things on legal immigration and a path to legalization and all of that?
It could be done together.
It could be done
Yes, it could be done together. First of all, the Homeland Security and border problem has to be tackled in 4 layers. First of all, you have to have more personnel. So we need more Border Patrol, we need National Guard troops, we need more people on the border. So we need more personnel. The second layer is we need to harden the assets. The crossings, the fences, the walls, the things like that that need to be put up, the barrier walls. So we have to harden our assets. The third thing we have to do is we have to have better technology and more technology. Technology is a good tool in monitoring what's happening on the borders. And the fourth thing, which I think is probably the most important thing, is we have to increase our intelligence capabilities because obviously this is an organized crime situation on both sides of the border because these are organized cartels that are moving people back and forth across the border, and basically we need to infiltrate them and we need to stop them.
Is your concern only the southern border? You haven't mentioned people who come in on student and
No, I
tourist
think-
visas and stay, and that's
No,
40%
I
of
think
the
we need
undocumented.
I definitely think we need a comprehensive immigration policy that covers the whole gamut as to who comes into America, who doesn't come into America, how they come in, how we enforce them staying the period of time they're supposed to stay. No, I think we need a comprehensive immigration policy.
How do you feel about Joe Biden's plan of essentially going to the countries where, in Central America, where people are leaving from and trying to stabilize the situations there with some more foreign aid, some, establishing schools, helping them with their criminal problems. It's kind of a softer diplomatic approach. Do you support that as well?
Well, I think we need a comprehensive immigration policy. And
Does it
that
include
would,
making other countries better so that people don't feel such a strong need to flee here?
well, I think that yes, working with other countries to not get them to have people come into our country. If they don't have to come here, obviously they won't. So yeah, it's all part of the component. I think we need to do it on a comprehensive basis. I don't think we can be narrow about it. I think we need a comprehensive immigration policy that looks at everything. We have to solve the problem. The problem is this issue has been hijacked by the far left and the far right. And that's why people have not had the courage to stand up and say, look, enough is enough. We need a comprehensive immigration policy because it's a wedge issue for both ends of the political spectrum and they're just using it.
To bring up, to switch tax a little bit, you brought up cutting taxes. I know it's an important part of your platform. Is there any significant part of the federal government where you could see cutting spending in order to offset that? Any specific ideas?
Yes, I think that there are a lot of different ideas. I think if you look at the various agencies, whether it be agriculture, whether it be transportation, whether it look at the subsidies that are handed out to businesses and things of that nature. I think you have to take a look at your spending, and you have to prioritize. And you've got to see what is most important. You also have to do a cost-benefit analysis. And I think that basically we don't do enough cost-benefit analysis either on our spending or on government regulations. So I think basically there has to be more analysis, there has to be more oversight, and yes, there are ways we can cut discretionary spending, and we should.
Did you favor Medicare, Medicaid coming as block grants to the states?
I think we have to take a look at Medicaid as a block grant. Basically, if we look at the amount of money that's spent on Medicaid and how cost efficient that money's being spent, like here in New York, the state only picks up a quarter of the tab of Medicaid, and basically they have a lot of control. I would be more in favor of giving them a set amount of money and saying, this is what you have to live with. And I think they would make better choices.
Kathleen, what do you think about block grants for Medicaid?
I know. I don't support that.
And what
Any
about
areas where you would cut spending, just to
just-
close the loop on that, yeah?
To close this loop, on Medicare, one of the proposals floating around is voucher, to turn that into a voucher system. Essentially give everyone, every senior a fixed amount of money and say, go out into the private marketplace and buy your insurance. Do you support that
No.
motion?
No.
You?
No.
Okay.
Kathleen, do you see any government, areas of the federal government that cut out for, that cry out for cutting spending?
There's no question that if you're going to talk about balancing the budget, you have to talk about smart spending cuts and revenue increases. I think through expansion of the economy, through education investment, job training, all of those things, small business investments. But I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know. I think that takes the kind of deep dive that maybe people don't normally do, because it's this partisan, one side says you want to cut spending and that means all the social programs. I think that there's probably a lot of cuts that you can make. I've worked in the federal government before. But I think that has to be done, if you really want it to mean something, I think you have to really go agency by agency and see how you can achieve some savings and, in terms of spending cuts. But, so I don't,
Okay.
I don't know, I'm going to be honest, I don't know exactly, where the inefficiencies are in each
If only we
agency
had a
and each
Department of
program.
Waste, Fraud, and Abuse, and we could just axe that.
Well, that would be, right.
Mr. Blakeman, on your website, you say you support repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
What would you replace it with?
Well, first of all, the whole program of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, was on the premise that we had to help those who were uninsured or underinsured, which was estimated to be about approximately 30 million people. And I'm all for that, and I was all for that. But I believe this is misguided. I think that basically it will not accomplish that goal. And I think that there's a better way to do it without dismantling what's one of the greatest healthcare provider systems in the history of mankind. So basically, what I would do is with the uninsured or underinsured who are affected by pre-existing condition, I would institute an assigned risk program like you have for an automobile policy. When you have an automobile policy, if you have a lot of accidents or you have a lot of traffic tickets, something Kathleen knows about, you would then be in an assigned risk pool. And you would have to pay a higher premium on your insurance as a result. And if you couldn't afford to pay that premium, then the government could step in with a subsidy to cover the difference on what it would cost for insurance if you didn't have a pre-existing condition and what it would be otherwise. So I think basically there was a way to solve that problem without instituting what is going to be a very costly federal program that is going to be a tax on the middle class. It has already shown itself to be a job killer, and I think people are losing their choice of healthcare provider, and that's what I'm hearing out in the 4th Congressional District, and people are very unhappy with it.
What was the traffic ticket
What are you referring to?
that they prosecute traffic tickets, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not that you had a traffic.
Yeah, that's why I just flew by, I'm like, what does he say?
I actually don't prosecute traffic
Yeah, I
tickets.
didn't think so, but that's why I was trying to figure it out.
Okay.
I want to understand, you hit on one little piece of what the Affordable Care Act does with the pre-existing conditions. I mean, obviously you're aware that there's a whole lot more involved in the law. Other people, huge numbers of other people who were brought into the system through this, not just pre-existing conditions. Do you think the system before Obamacare was working just fine?
No,
But you'd send us back to that.
no.
Then I'm not clear what you'd do.
I just said I would
On
replace
pre-existing
it.
conditions,
I
right?
What
would,
about
I
for
would,
people that were just poor, or not poor enough to get
Who just
Medicaid,
simply
but
couldn't
just, they just
buy
didn't have
insurance.
insurance,
well,
the other 20 million?
well, basically, here in New York, it's not a problem. Most people
not?
most people get the health care that they need, but they get it through the emergency rooms at hospitals. I think we need to expand our clinic-based and ambulatory care systems so that we can treat people that should not be treated in an emergency room setting, which is which is a high cost. It's not very efficient. So I basically think that people are getting treatment here in New York, but they're getting the treatment in a very inefficient manner. It's not good for them. They have to wait hours for treatment, and it's very costly. So I'd like to expand our clinic system and our ambulatory care system so that we could take care of more people and it would cost less money.
Would you agree that the easiest way to put these in between people in a situation where they're going to clinics rather than emergency rooms or whatever would be just to put them all on Medicaid if they can't afford health insurance?
Well-
Because that's how you direct them towards doctors, right?
Well, basically, I think it could be on a Medicaid system. I also think it could be some kind of clinic network. So I think there are ways to do it, but basically, we need to get people who shouldn't be in the emergency room into clinics and into ambulatory care facilities, and that would drive down the cost quite a bit. So,
It's certainly a huge goal of Obamacare.
yeah, it was, but I don't think that's the vehicle to get there, and I don't think that's how it's going to get there.
The Affordable Care Act, any thoughts?
This country, America, in my opinion, we have a moral imperative to ensure that every single American has access to a doctor if they need one. And that just simply was not the case before. People were using emergency rooms as their primary care physician, and that's where the overburdening costs came from, the hospitals. Do I think the rollout could have been better? Yes. Do I think that repealing Obamacare is the answer? No. And I don't think most people today are talking about repealing Obamacare. And certainly those that are, not that I haven't heard them come up with an equal alternative. I think what I've heard from people in the 4th Congressional District, especially given the situation with the next generation of Americans being burdened with crushing student loan debt, the fact that parents are able to keep their kids on their insurance until they're 26 is a game changer. Parents, it's incredible. Do I think that when you are living in a world where 1 out of 4 women are going to be diagnosed with breast cancer, that pre-existing conditions you cannot be denied? I think that's incredible. There are really good things, people getting insurance and actually having preventative care so that we're not paying these astronomical medical costs for people who are not engaged in healthy medical care their entire lives from the time that they are young. Yes, that we're going to see that pay off. I think you're going to see in the immediate the fact that people are not going to emergency rooms as their primary care physician. You're going to see a savings right there immediately. Do I think that you can address things like the employer mandate? Yes, I think we're going to have to address that issue. I don't think that's going to work. But I'm not an extremist when it comes to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think you have to say, yes, more Americans now are getting the health care that they need. They can go to a doctor when they need to go to a doctor. The number one cause of bankruptcy, the number one cause is crushing medical bills that people can't pay. So we had to address this issue, not just from a financial and economic standpoint for long-term stability, but from a human standpoint, certainly. So do I think it's perfect? No, but very little in life is. And I think that you fix what's broken and you embrace all the good things about it.
I think an assigned risk program would solve the bankruptcy problem.
Would either of you support privatizing Social Security?
No.
No.
Not even a little, not 20%, I can't maybe direct 20% of my contribution to a stock program or anything like that.
No.
Okay,
No.
I just wanna make sure.
Before you arrived at Blakeman, we were talking, we asked the DA, you want to succeed a woman who made a reputation on gun control. So could you tell us how you view bans on assault weapons and other ways of restricting access to?
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I believe law-abiding citizens should have the right to own weapons, and they should be entitled to have them for personal protection, for home protection, for sport. However, I don't think that should be unregulated. I think that basically there has to be reasonable controls on who gets weapons, and I think there has to be controls on what type of weapons they can obtain. It should not be they can obtain any weapon, and it should not be for anybody. But the biggest problem with mass killings is really a mental health issue. And we have to address that and get serious about that and solve that problem, because that seems to be the consistent component in all these mass killings.
So
I think
gun
you're
control-
absolutely right on mass killings, but many, many more people are killed in the day-to-day gun violence that goes on. You know, the domestic violence, the crime in the streets, the accidents, the suicides. Some specifics. Would you, for instance, want to close the gun show loophole? So the background checks are done on everyone who buys a gun, no matter what venue they used to buy it.
Yes.
Would you limit magazines, the volume of magazines?
I think you have to look at it a case-by-case basis, weapon by weapon, and I don't profess to be a weapons expert. I would rely on testimony with respect to what weapons have what capabilities, and then I think we have to make a rational and reasonable judgment as to whether or not that weapon should be the type of weapon that people should be able to obtain.
If you were to win, and you went down to caucus with the Republicans, where would you ask to, what committees would you ask to be on?
I wouldn't say any one committee. I have interests, certainly finance, foreign affairs, transportation would all be committees that I would be highly interested in.
And right now, the approval rating of Congress is in the teens. How do you see yourself personally being able to change that in your district and as part of this body?
Well, I think if I'm elected, it'll materially go up, so.
Yeah. America rejoices.
Exactly.
All right, anyone have anything else?
No.
Yeah. Well, we kept you over, I apologize, but thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.